A man loses what he loved to do and discovers something that transforms his life. John Harrison never imagined that what he loved doing, which sustained him for decades, would be unexpectedly replaced. In a moment, he lost everything. But as he struggles to find his place in a world he no longer recognizes, an old passion resurfaces. Will this new journey bring answers or just new challenges? And what will he do when faced with an opportunity that could transform his life? John Harrison, 52 years old, a resident of the small town of Fairview, woke up that morning with a feeling of emptiness in his chest. For more than 3 decades, he followed the same routine, waking up before dawn, drinking a strong coffee, and driving to the automotive parts factory where he worked. The company was his second home, and his colleagues were his second family. However, that day would be different. John had been laid off, along with dozens of other employees, due to the economic crisis and the modernization of the production line. Machines now did the work that John and his companions used to do with their hands. When he arrived home, John found his wife, Linda, in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Her warm smile, always a safe haven for him, could not dispel the weight he felt on his shoulders. "Good morning, love," said Linda, but the worried look in her eyes gave away that she knew it wouldn't be a good day. John sat at the table, trying to hide his sadness, but the reality was inescapable. Without work, he felt like a shadow of the man he once was. "Linda, I don't know what I'm going to do now," he admitted, finally letting the words out. Linda placed her hand on his, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out together, John. You've worked hard for many years. Maybe this is the time to find something new, something you really enjoy doing." His wife's words were comforting, but they couldn't dispel the fear that was spreading in John's heart. He had never thought of doing anything else. His job at the factory defined his identity, and now, without it, John felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainties. As he drank his coffee, John looked out the kitchen window. Outside, the sun was slowly rising, illuminating the quiet streets of Fairview. The town, which he knew so well, now seemed strange, almost alien. He had always been proud to be a dedicated worker, someone who provided for his family. Without that job, who was he now? The lack of a clear answer consumed him inside. In the following weeks, John tried to maintain a routine. He woke up early, but instead of going to the factory, he spent his mornings reading the newspaper and his afternoons looking for job vacancies. With each ad he read, the feeling of inadequacy grew. Opportunities were scarce for someone his age with his specific skills. With each rejection he received, the frustration grew. Free time, which many would consider a blessing, for him was a burden. The lack of occupation began to affect his mental health. John, who had always been a calm and peaceful man, became consumed by constant anxiety. He avoided meetings with friends and family, fearing questions about how he was coping with the new reality. He increasingly isolated himself, and his relationship with Linda also began to suffer. Conversations, once light and lively, became rare and full of tension. One afternoon, while aimlessly walking through the city park, John ran into Mike, an old school friend. Mike was a simple man who had retired a few years ago. He spent his days fishing and tending to his small garden. Seeing John, Mike smiled and greeted him warmly. "John, long time no see. What brings you here?" John, with little choice, told Mike about his recent layoff and how he felt lost. Mike listened attentively, without interrupting, and when John finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "You know, John, I went through something similar when I retired. Suddenly, all the purpose I had disappeared, and I didn't know what to do. But over time, I found that life offers new opportunities, even when everything seems lost." Mike paused and then continued, "Have you ever thought about doing something you enjoyed in the past before work took up all your time?" Mike's words echoed in John's mind. He tried to remember what he used to enjoy doing before he started working at the factory. It was difficult, as it seemed his entire life had been dedicated to work. But vaguely, he remembered a hobby he had in his youth: woodworking. "I used to make things out of wood, Mike, but it's been so long that I don't even know if I still have the knack for it," John admitted with a shy smile. "Maybe it's time to find out, my friend. Sometimes rediscovering old pleasures is what we need to find a new path." Despite Mike's encouraging words, John felt a mixture of hope and fear. The idea of returning to woodworking was both comforting and terrifying. He knew he needed to do something to escape the emptiness he found himself in, but insecurity kept him paralyzed. That night, as he tried to sleep, Mike's words echoed in his mind. Could it be possible to rediscover a dormant passion? Or was he just clinging to an illusion to fill the void that was consuming him? The next morning, John woke up with a different feeling, a slight spark of determination. The conversation with Mike had ignited something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He remembered the hours he spent in the garage, carving pieces of wood, creating something from nothing. The idea of reviving that old hobby suddenly didn't seem so absurd. After breakfast, John went to the garage, a place he hadn't visited in months. The space was disorganized, full of rusty tools and boxes of forgotten things. However, he felt a slight thrill as he looked around, remembering when he was young and spent hours there, creating small wooden pieces. Determined to dust off the past, he began to organize the space. With an energy he hadn't felt in weeks, John cleaned the workbenches, separated the tools that were still in good condition, and threw away what was no longer useful. When he finished, the garage looked like a different place, almost like a studio, ready to be used. With slight nervousness, John decided to go to the town's hardware store. It had been years since he had bought wood or tools, and the feeling of entering almost forgotten territory made him a little anxious. However, as he walked through the store's aisles, he began to feel at ease. The raw wood, the sharp tools, the possibilities each material offered, all this reminded him why he loved woodworking so much. John bought some pine boards, sandpaper, paints, and some new chisels. When he got home, he was eager to start. He decided to begin with something simple: a decorative box. It was a small project, but enough to test his skills and see if he still had the knack for the work. The first hours were difficult. John's hands were rusty, and he had to redo some cuts and adjustments several times. But as the day passed, he began to reconnect with the process. The sound of wood being worked, the smell of sawdust in the air, the concentration required for each detail. All this transported him back to the days when he did this for pure pleasure, without the pressure of the outside world. With each movement, John remembered what he most appreciated about this work. It wasn't just the creation of objects, but the feeling of control and accomplishment that came with each finished piece. He was, in a way, rebuilding something within himself, a part he had lost when he was laid off. With each cut, each polish, John felt he was carving not just the wood but his own identity. When the first box was finished, it was already night. John was tired, but there was a smile on his face that he hadn't seen in months. He looked at the piece with pride, knowing it wasn't perfect, but that it was a start. Linda, who had spent the day visiting a friend, returned home and found John in the garage, admiring his creation. "What did you make there?" she asked, curious, as she saw the wooden box on the workbench. John looked at her with a sparkle in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. "It's a decorative box. Nothing much, just something I wanted to try making." Linda approached and examined the piece, running her fingers over the smoothly worked edges. "John, it's beautiful. You always had a talent for this, remember?" He nodded, feeling a wave of emotions as he realized his wife's support. "I think so. Maybe it's something I should keep doing, to pass the time at least. Or maybe something more than that?" Linda suggested with an encouraging smile. In the days that followed, John dedicated himself to woodworking with renewed energy. He began creating other simple pieces, picture frames, small wooden toys, jewelry boxes. Each new creation seemed to rekindle his passion for the craft, and he felt increasingly at ease with the tools in his hands. One day, his daughter, Emily, came to visit them. She lived in a nearby town and hadn't seen her father in a few weeks. When she entered the garage, she was surprised to see the new environment and her father's creations. "Dad, did you make all this?" she asked, amazed as she saw the pieces displayed on an improvised shelf. John, a little embarrassed, nodded. "I'm just trying to keep busy." "You're amazing," Emily exclaimed. "Have you thought about showing this to other people? I'm sure many would love to have one of these pieces." Emily's suggestion made John reflect. Although woodworking was, at that moment, a way to deal with free time, the idea of turning it into something more serious began to take shape in his mind. The idea of showing his creations to others began to infiltrate John's thoughts, almost like a new spark of hope. Emily, always encouraging, insisted that he consider the possibility of selling his pieces. However, John still felt insecure. To him, it was just a hobby, something he did to pass the time and calm his mind. But as the days went by, his daughter's suggestion took shape, and he began to seriously ponder turning his pastime into something more. As he worked in the garage, John found himself imagining what it would be like if others appreciated what he made. The idea of creating something with his own hands and seeing it valued by others began to awaken in him a new sense of purpose. He remembered the times at the factory, where each piece was just another in a production line. Now, every object he created was unique, carried a part of his soul, something he had never felt before. On a Saturday afternoon, Emily returned to visit her parents, this time bringing a surprise. She had created an online page to showcase John's wooden pieces, with well-taken photos and a loving description of each item. When she showed the site to her father, he was speechless. "Dad, people need to see what you're doing," Emily said enthusiastically. "I created this page for you. We can start selling here, and if it works out, we can expand to other platforms. What do you think?" John looked at the computer screen, seeing photos of the pieces he had made with so much care. The idea that someone might be interested in buying them seemed surreal, but at the same time, a hint of excitement began to rise within him. I don't know what to say, Emily. This is amazing, but do you really think people will want to buy this?" "Of course they will, Dad. You have talent, and there are many people who value handcrafted work. Besides, you're creating something unique, something made with care and passion. And that's rare these days." Convinced by his daughter's enthusiasm, John decided to give the idea a chance. He began to devote more time to woodworking, creating new pieces and perfecting his techniques. Emily, always by his side, helped take photos of the new creations and post them on the online page. To John's surprise, within a few weeks, the first orders began to appear. The first customer was a man from the town of Fairview, who ordered a decorative box as a gift for his wife. When John delivered the piece, the man was delighted with the work, praising every detail. That filled John with a satisfaction he hadn't felt since he lost his job. Knowing that something he had created with his own hands was now bringing joy to someone else was an indescribable feeling. As the days passed, John began to notice a change within himself. What had once been a simple way to occupy time was now taking shape as a new purpose. He felt increasingly confident in his abilities, and each new order was an opportunity to improve, to challenge himself, and to create something even more special. Over time, orders began to increase. People from other towns, even from other states, discovered John's page and began ordering his pieces. The garage, once a cluttered and lifeless space, was now the beating heart of a small woodworking shop. John worked tirelessly, but unlike at the factory, he did so with a smile on his face, feeling fulfilled with each new creation. Linda, always by John's side, watched her husband's transformation with joy. The man who had been consumed by sadness and uncertainty was now rejuvenated, with a new energy she hadn't seen in years. And Emily, who initially gave her father the push, was thrilled with the growing success of the business. However, with the increase in orders, challenges also began to arise. John, used to working alone, began to feel the pressure of meeting the growing demand. There were days when he spent hours in the garage, trying to complete orders on time. Exhaustion began to set in, and although John was happy with this new phase of his life, he also knew he needed to find a way to balance work with his well-being. One night, after a long day of work, John and Linda sat down at the kitchen table for dinner. The silence between them was comfortable, but Linda knew she needed to talk about what she was observing. "John, you've been doing amazing work, but I'm worried about you," she said lovingly. "Don't you think you're overworking yourself?" John sighed, knowing Linda was right. "I know, love, but it's hard. I don't want to disappoint anyone. And besides, I enjoy what I'm doing. It's just a lot for one person." Linda smiled understandingly. "Maybe it's time to think about expanding in a way that you can keep doing what you love without burning out. Maybe hire someone to help? Have you thought about that?" John had never considered the idea of having an assistant. Woodworking had always been something personal for him, but maybe Linda was right. If he wanted to continue, and perhaps even grow, he would need help. In the following days, John reflected on his wife's advice. He began to think about the possibility of teaching someone, passing on what he knew. With the business growing and orders increasing every day, John decided it was time to follow Linda's advice and seek help. The idea of having an apprentice was both exciting and challenging. Teaching someone the art of woodworking required patience, something he would need to learn to cultivate. However, he also saw it as an opportunity to perpetuate the craft tradition and share the burden that was starting to weigh on his shoulders. John began looking for someone interested and willing to learn the trade. He posted a small ad in the local newspaper and talked to some acquaintances for recommendations. After a few weeks of searching, he finally found a young man named Ethan, 23 years old, who lived in the Fairview area. Ethan was a quiet and curious young man with a real passion for manual work but with little experience. He had worked in a hardware store and was interested in John's offer when he learned he would learn something new. "So, Ethan, are you ready to start?" John asked as he showed the young man the garage that now served as his studio. Ethan looked around, impressed with what he saw. "I am, Mr. Harrison. I really want to learn. I just hope I can keep up." John smiled, feeling confident in the choice he had made. "Don't worry, Ethan. We'll start slow. The most important thing is to have patience and enjoy what you do." In the first few days, John dedicated himself to teaching Ethan the basics of woodworking. How to choose the right material, how to handle the tools, the importance of details, and above all, the need for care and precision in each step of the process. Ethan, for his part, proved to be a dedicated apprentice, attentive to every instruction, and soon began to show a talent for the craft. As Ethan gained confidence, John began to delegate more complex parts of the projects to him. The partnership between the two began to work harmoniously. John noticed that, with Ethan's help, he could maintain the quality of his work while increasing production. More importantly, John felt renewed by being able to pass on his knowledge, realizing that he was not only building wooden objects but also shaping someone's future. However, just when things seemed to be stabilizing, John received an unexpected offer that would test his convictions. One autumn morning, while attending a local fair where he displayed and sold his creations, John was approached by an old work colleague, James, whom he hadn't seen since they were both laid off from the factory. James now worked as a business consultant and was involved in a project to revitalize small businesses in the region. "John, it's good to see you," James exclaimed as he approached. "I've heard about your business and came to check it out in person. Man, you're doing an amazing job here." John smiled, happy to see a familiar face. "Thanks, James. I've been putting a lot into this over the past few months. And you, how are you?" James briefly explained his new job and then got straight to the point. "John, The reason I'm here today is that I'm working with some investors who are very interested in businesses like yours. Handcraft is in high demand, especially exclusive handmade pieces. I believe we can turn this into something much bigger." Intrigued, John asked, "What do you mean, something bigger?" James smiled and explained, "I'm talking about expanding your business, John. I have investors willing to put money into increasing your production, maybe even opening a small factory. Of course, this means producing on a larger scale, but the demand is there. We could sell your pieces in large stores and even online on a much broader level." John felt his stomach turn. The idea of expanding the business was undoubtedly tempting. Having more resources, reaching a larger audience, and securing a stable income sounded appealing, especially for someone who had spent so many years in financial uncertainty. However, there was a part of the plan that deeply troubled him. "James, I appreciate the offer, but producing on a large scale? Wouldn't that compromise the quality and authenticity of the work? I like doing everything with care. Each piece is unique. I'm not sure I'd feel comfortable turning this into a production line." James, sensing John's hesitation, tried to persuade him. "I understand, John, but think of the opportunities. You could reach many more people, have a thriving business, and secure your future and your families. With the right funding, you could invest in better tools, hire more people. Think of how many doors this would open." John remained silent for a few moments, weighing the pros and cons. He knew this decision wouldn't be easy. Accepting the offer meant giving up part of the essence of his work, something he had rediscovered and that had brought purpose back into his life. On the other hand, refusing meant maintaining the integrity of his craftsmanship, but perhaps missing a unique growth opportunity. That night, John discussed the offer with Linda. She listened patiently as he explained the details and expressed his concerns. "John, only you can decide what's best," said Linda, with the wisdom that always accompanied her. "I know how much this means to you. If you accept, you could grow and reach many more people. But if you refuse and continue as you are, you'll have the certainty that you're doing something you truly believe in." John knew that his decision would not only affect himself but also his family and even Ethan, who was just beginning to tread this path. He would need to choose wisely, balancing the desire to grow with the need to maintain the authenticity he valued so much. John spent a sleepless night pondering James's offer. The temptation to accept the investment was great. After all, he had always dreamed of securing his family's financial stability. However, what weighed most on his mind was the fear of losing what he had rediscovered. The joy and satisfaction of creating something unique with his own hands. The next morning, John decided he needed to listen to his intuition. He called James and arranged a meeting. James arrived at John's house at the agreed time, full of enthusiasm and expectations. But he realized from John's serious expression that the conversation would be more complicated than he had anticipated. "James, I thought a lot about your offer," John began with a firm voice. "And honestly, it's a tempting offer. I understand the growth potential and the opportunities this could bring. But I also understand that by accepting, I'd be sacrificing something I've recently rediscovered and that has become very important to me." James frowned but remained calm. "I understand your concerns, John, but it's possible to find a balance. We can maintain the quality even on a larger scale. With the right resources, you could have a trained team to maintain the standards you require." John shook his head, reflecting on James's words. "Maybe it's possible, but even so, I can't help but feel like I'm betraying the essence of what I've created. I don't want to turn what I love into a production line. I rediscovered the joy of creating something from scratch, paying attention to the details, feeling proud of each piece. That's priceless." James sighed, realizing that John was determined. "So, what do you plan to do?" John smiled with a tranquility he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm going to continue in my own way, maintaining the handcrafted and exclusive work. I know this might limit the business's growth, but I'm willing to accept that limitation in exchange for the satisfaction I feel in doing what I love." James slowly nodded, respecting his friend's decision. I admire your conviction, John. It's not easy to turn down an offer like this, but I understand that you're following your heart. If you ever change your mind, the offer will still be on the table. Thank you, James, said John, extending his hand. I really appreciate the opportunity and for believing in my work. I just hope you understand why I can't accept it. The two parted on good terms, and John felt relieved knowing he had made the right choice for himself. He knew he would continue to face challenges, but he was at peace with the decision to stay true to his principles and the passion he had rediscovered. With the decision made, John returned to his routine, now more confident than ever. His relationship with Ethan continued to grow, and the young apprentice showed increasing skill and commitment to woodworking. John realized that, besides teaching techniques, he was passing on to Ethan the value of dedicating oneself with love and care to what one does. One day, while they were working together on a new piece, Ethan, with a thoughtful air, asked, Mr. Harrison, why did you decide not to accept that investor's offer? I know you could have made a lot more money with it. John stopped what he was doing and looked at Ethan with a calm smile. Ethan, sometimes in life, we need to choose what truly makes us happy, even if it means giving up something bigger. I found in woodworking something that gives me meaning, something that connects me with who I am. Money is important, of course, but it's not worth it if I lose the pleasure of what I do. Ethan reflected on John's words and nodded, understanding the value of that lesson. I understand, Mr. Harrison. I think that's why I like working here so much. It's not just about making something beautiful. It's about making something meaningful. Exactly, Ethan, John replied, satisfied. And that's what I want to pass on. It doesn't matter the size of the business. What matters is the integrity of what we do. Over time, John's decision proved to be the right one. Although he did not choose to expand the business on an industrial scale, his work gained recognition in circles of people who valued quality craftsmanship. John and Ethan began to receive invitations to participate in renowned craft fairs and even exhibitions, where their pieces were appreciated by craft enthusiasts and collectors. One day, while John was working in his garage, he received an unexpected visit. A representative from a large department store in the region, who had seen his pieces at one of the fairs, was interested in forming a partnership. She proposed selling John's creations in a special section of the store, highlighting the craftsmanship and the exclusivity of each piece. John once again found himself facing a dilemma. The offer was different from James's. It wasn't about mass production, but about bringing his pieces to a larger audience without compromising the quality and artisanal character of the work. This time, he felt he could accept the challenge without sacrificing his principles. With Ethan's help, they adjusted the production to meet the new demand without losing the care and attention to detail that had always been his trademark. The months following the new partnership with the department store brought John a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. His small workshop, which had once been just a refuge where he rediscovered his passion, had now become a place where dreams were shaped into wood. With each piece he created, John felt he was, in some way, rebuilding his own life, piece by piece. His relationship with Ethan continued to strengthen, not just as mentor and apprentice, but as work partners. John watched with pride as the young man progressed, who had not only learned the techniques but also embraced the philosophy of craftsmanship with the same dedication that John had always had. Ethan began creating his own pieces, each carrying a bit of the soul that John had passed on to him. The partnership with the department store also evolved positively. The store not only respected the artisanal character of the pieces, but also promoted the values that John and Ethan represented. This attracted customers who valued handcrafted work and the authenticity of each creation. Demand continued to grow, but thanks to careful planning and the balance that John had found, they managed to keep up the pace without compromising quality. One afternoon, while they were busy in the workshop, John received a call that caught him by surprise. It was the store manager, who wanted to schedule an important meeting to discuss new opportunities. Curious, John accepted the proposal, and the next day he went to the store for the meeting. The manager welcomed him with a warm smile and led John to a meeting room where other people were waiting. Among them was a representative from a famous design magazine specializing in crafts and home decor. John felt a little nervous, not quite understanding what was happening, but the manager quickly reassured him. "John, you've been doing exceptional work," the manager began. "Your dedication to craftsmanship is admirable, and we want to recognize that in a special way. This is Peter, the editor of Craft and Home magazine. They're very interested in doing a feature on you and your work, highlighting your story and the authenticity of your creations." John was surprised, speechless for a moment. He had never imagined that his work could attract so much attention. The idea of a feature in a renowned magazine was something he had never considered, but the thought that his story could inspire others filled him with a quiet pride. I don't know what to say," John finally managed to articulate. "I never imagined my work would reach this point." Peter smiled and replied, "Your story is inspiring, John. Many of our readers are artisans or people who admire handcrafted work, and I believe your journey, from losing your job to rediscovering a passion, could touch many hearts." John, with a feeling of humility, accepted the proposal. In the following days, a magazine team visited his workshop to take photos and conduct interviews. They spent hours talking about John's creative process, about how he and Ethan worked together, and about the challenges and rewards of maintaining the integrity of handcrafted work in a market increasingly oriented toward mass production. When the feature was published, the response was beyond what John had ever expected. He began receiving letters and emails from people all over the country, some sharing their own stories of overcoming, others thanking him for showing that it's possible to pursue a passion, even when life's circumstances seem to be against you. One of the most emotional moments for John was when he received a letter from a man his age who was going through a similar situation. The man, who had worked for decades in a large company and had recently lost his job, told how John's story gave him hope and motivation to look for a new passion, something that could bring meaning to his life again. As John read the letter, he felt a deep connection with that stranger. He understood that his journey wasn't just about creating wooden pieces, but about the ability to reinvent oneself, to find light in dark moments, and to turn losses into new beginnings. As time passed, John and Ethan's workshop became a small point of reference in the Fairview community. People came from far and wide to see the creations, to learn about the process, and especially to know the story behind the pieces. The workshop ceased to be just a workplace and became a space for sharing, where John and Ethan held small workshops, teaching others to rediscover their passions through craftsmanship. One night, while sitting on the porch with Linda, admiring the sunset, John reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful day when he lost his job. He thought about how, at the beginning, he felt his life had lost its way, and how, through something as simple as woodworking, he had found a new purpose, a new path. Linda, noticing John's distant gaze, asked lovingly, "What are you thinking about, love?" John smiled, still looking at the horizon. "I was thinking about how things have changed, how I lost something I thought was the most important thing in my life and ended up discovering something that brought much more than I imagined. If someone had told me back then that I'd be here today, feeling fulfilled with this work, I would never have believed it." Linda took John's hand and said softly, "I always knew you'd find your way. You have a strong heart, John, and that's what really matters. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished." John squeezed Linda's hand and, for the first time in a long time, felt completely at peace. He knew that the path he had chosen, though difficult and full of uncertainties, had been the right one for him. More than just a hobby or a new job, woodworking had given him back the joy of living, the connection with others, and most importantly, with himself. And so, as the night fell over Fairview, John looked to the future with renewed confidence. He knew that, regardless of the challenges that might still arise, he was prepared to face them because he had rediscovered something fundamental: the transformative power of following what the heart truly desires.